am so glad you could join me again for the continuation of our reading of Pixie Pushes On. Yesterday, I remember we talked a little bit about the setting, making it into the time period when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president. And I thought it was ironic because we're sitting here at the fireside, and back during those days, FDR used to always give nationwide addresses that were called fireside chats that people would listen to on the radio. So I think it's appropriate that we are having our fireside chat while we discuss this book. I asked for some summaries on that, and I have one summary here that says a little summation of what we read yesterday in chapter 1, and it's from Chad. Prudence tells us that her sister has polio, and she is mad. She isn't there for her, especially since she thinks her teacher doesn't like her. She makes up names for people and is not happy. And I think that's a good summation of what we read yesterday. We kind of just let Prudence introduce herself to us, and that is where we left off. So we are going to start in with chapter 2 of Pixie Pushes On. It was lunch, and I was eating the fried egg sandwich Grandma makes for me every day, even though I always tell her it's cold and soggy by lunchtime. She reminds me she's making do with the wartime shortages and rations, and since the hens are laying lots of eggs, we're eating lots of eggs. And I think right there, I'll tell you a little bit more about rations when we get a little bit further in the book, but back in that time, just to make sure they didn't run out of anything important for people, they used to limit the amount of food or gasoline and things like that that they could have during wartime. So we can kind of relate with some of the stories they've talked about lately of how everybody's running out and getting a ton of the things that they need, the milk and the toilet paper and things that are happening today. So back in the wartime, they had rations that said, no, you can only have this amount of eggs every month, and you can only have this much milk every month, and sugar and things that were rations. So you'll hear that word come up in here a little bit. Also, a little side note, that particular part was taken completely from my dad, who used to tell me about how he had 8 kids in his family. They grew up on the farm, and every day he had to have a fried egg sandwich for lunch, and he hated a fried egg sandwich because, as you can imagine, it would be cold and soggy by the time they would eat it, and they also didn't have the ways of preserving it, like in a Tupperware box or a bowl or a bag of any sort. So it was wrapped in paper, and it was about 4 hours old, but my grandma said that very thing to him: if the hens are laying eggs, we're eating eggs. And so I took that straight from my dad. So we have Prudence sitting there eating her lunch. I sat there on my lonely side of the classroom, dreaming of the jam sandwiches Mama used to make me back home when she was alive and the war wasn't changing everything for everybody. I was taking another bite of that cold, soggy sandwich, minding my own business, when I spied the ugliest bug crawling across the floor. But my bug watching was interrupted when something hit me smack in the middle of my forehead. I reached up to touch it, and wouldn't you know, it was the slimiest spitwad ever thrown at a living person. Right then I saw plain as day that boy whose name is Ricky looking at me, the boy I call Rotten Ricky. Not having many friends here gives me lots of time to make up my own names for everyone. Rotten Ricky had this innocent look on his face, and he even had the nerve to smile at me. I didn't hold that slimy stick wet spitwad for a second before I threw it right back at him. It wasn't my fault that Miss Meanie Beanie picked that very moment to walk by, or that my perfectly aimed slimy spitwad landed smack in the middle of her forehead. And the moment it did, time stood still. Every single student in the entire 5th grade stopped what they were doing, including breathing. I bet anything that dang bug even stopped crawling across the floor. And Miss Meanie Beanie turned her head so slow, like she'd just figured out how to turn a head for the first time. That spitwad stayed right in the middle of her forehead like it belonged there. And as soon as her eyes focused on me, the hate shot out of them like chickens running from a fox. I wanted to run too. Instead, I tried to speak, except my mouth must have forgot how. But not me. rotten was all I could manage. Miss Meanie Beanie's mouth must have had the same problem as mine. You, what, why? Closet, now! She pointed her bony finger straight at the coat closet, but I didn't move. Even though the calendar says it's fall, someone must have forgot to tell the sun that, 'cause it burned down on us like it was still those dog days of summer. I imagine that coat closet had to be over 100 degrees. Now, Miss Meanie Beanie yelled. As she did, the spit wad lost its place on her forehead and rolled down her face in a slower than molasses way and landed on her lace collar. A look of horror flashed across her face, and I knew I'd have a better chance at convincing our cow never to move again. So I went into the hottest, stinkiest place in the entire school. I heard the rattle of the door closing right behind me before feeling something land in my hair that fell from the rafters. I needed to scream right then, but feared the laughs of the other kids even more than I feared whatever was crawling on me. I started flapping my head back and forth, but whatever was crawling on me hung on, probably enjoying the ride. Ripping out the braids Grandma had spent half an hour on after bath night last week, I ran my fingers all over my scalp and through my hair. After I'd worked up a real sweat jumping around that roasting hot closet, that crawly thing must have slipped right off. I imagined I'd looked so frazzled that Grandma would have clucked her tongue at me the way she does sometimes when I'm not presentable. I finally settled myself and noticed 2 old desks stacked one on top of the other. If I unstacked them and set them side by side, I could make a place to lay myself down. So that's just what I did. And as soon as my head hit the softness on my arm resting on the desk, my eyes shut fast. But that's not even the worst part of my day. Oh no. Getting hit with the spit wad, getting sent to the closet, getting dang near ate up by some mystery bug, all that was bad enough for my day. But that didn't hold a candle to the part of my day that began when I woke up from that nap. End of chapter 2. Now, right at this point, we've learned a little bit more about Prudence, and we have found out that she doesn't have a lot of friends because she's sitting on the side of the schoolroom eating her lunch all by herself. We also found out that, like we thought the last time, that she makes really quick judgments. She immediately just figured out that Ricky threw the spit wad when all he did was smile at her. We don't know if he really did throw it. But then we also found that out about the teacher, too, that she just assumed that that spit wad was thrown at her, too. So she got mad at Prudence as well. The coat closet thing was a way that it was used sometimes to keep the students who were misbehaving. You don't find that in today's schools very much, I hope. But back in the older days, it was a good way just to divide the kids up and to keep the troublemakers in a little time out. But I think the slamming of the door might have been a bit much too. But we can't leave poor Prudence in the coat closet, so let's read chapter 3. I hadn't the foggiest idea of where I was when I woke. I just knew my arm was asleep from resting on it. Of course, I forgot I was perched on a couple of desks, so when I stretched, I fell smack dab onto the dirty closet floor. That's when the events of the day splashed over across my mind like a cold glass of water. And the thought of a cold glass of water made me want one like I'd never thirsted for something before in my life. So polite as I could, I knocked on the door, hoping Miss Meanie Beanie would decide I'd been in there long enough, never minding how long enough had been. My polite knock didn't get any attention, so I knocked less polite, and then much louder. I figured Miss Meanie Beanie was being stubborn, but I'd had enough. I decided it was time to walk right out of that closet. Wouldn't you know, that door wouldn't budge. I pulled and pounded on it, and then I took to screaming like the school was on fire. In fact, how was I to know the school wasn't on fire? Let me out, now, get me out of here. But no one came. After a while, I noticed something that made my heart stop a bit. There wasn't a sound coming from the entire classroom. That could only mean one thing. They'd all left. With me in the closet, they all up and went home to their cold drinks of water and family dinners and soft beds. I was so dang mad I'd rather spit than cry, but something inside me forgot to tell my eyeballs that, because as soon as I sat down and leaned against the wall, tears started flowing. And right between my sobs, I heard the closet door shaking and groaning before it opened. I jumped up to thank whoever saved me, till I saw it was none other than Ricky, Rotten Ricky. "What you doing in here?" he asked, like he had no idea why I might be hanging out in the stinky coat closet after everyone else went home, like he wasn't the one to have practically put me in there himself. I lunged at him so hard he toppled down like an axed Christmas tree, and I'm not sure who my outburst surprised more. "Prudence!" Miss Meanie Beanie's voice rang out and sounded like she was the most surprised of all. 'Cause there I sat, on top of Ricky. I stood up and straightened the dang dress I had to wear to school instead of my comfy overalls. "Should have left you rotten there," Rotten Ricky mumbled as he stood up and stormed out of the room. Miss Meanie Beanie's eyes were looking at me like I had 3 heads. "I know things at home are challenging, but your behavior is not acceptable. Right at the end of school today," she began to explain, "I got a call to a meeting with the superintendent and, well, I forgot to get you out first. As soon as I remembered, I ran here, and that's when I saw you pushing Ricky after he helped you out. I just don't understand." And then Miss Meanie Beanie sighed. "You missed the bus. Come on, I'll take you home." "I'll walk," I mumbled. "Your farm is over 5 miles away." She said that like she had to remind me where I lived. But I bit my tongue to keep from mouthing off. Instead, I followed her out of the classroom and toward the front door. That's when Miss Meanie Beanie stopped and looked at me. "I'm sorry," she said. Now, why'd she have to go and do that? I can't stand it when I'm good and mad at somebody and they apologize. And then I just can't muster up any more mad. I stopped and stared at the floor, but it was getting blurry from the tears in my eyes. Miss Meanie Beanie knelt down to talk to me like I was 5 years old. "Prudence," she said softly, "I'm sorry I left you in the coat closet, and I'm really sorry about Charlotte. I know how this must be affecting you." "You don't know a thing about me," I wanted to say, but fortunately my mouth wasn't moving any more than my legs. The only part of me that was doing anything at all right then was my eyes, and I didn't like all those tears. Miss Meanie Beanie took my silence as an invitation to keep talking. "I think we got off on the wrong foot when you came last winter. And then this whole ordeal with Charlotte. Ordeal, trouble, affliction. I was tired of grown-ups calling it all sorts of names, as if dressing up a pig in your Sunday best would make it anything other than a pig. I wanted to yell, 'My sister has polio! Polio! And it's my fault! I hate it! Hate it!' But instead, I just looked Miss Meanie Beanie in the eye, and for a second, she wasn't so mean. Her lips even seemed to be forming a sad-looking smile as she nodded toward the front door of the school. 'Let's go now.' It wasn't until I was on my way out with her that I saw Rotten Ricky in a classroom with a bucket of something, hearing every word Miss Meanie Beanie said, and probably some of the ones I didn't say. End of chapter 3. So here we've learned a little bit more about Prudence. We still don't know why it's called Pixie yet. We've learned a little bit more about Prudence, and we've learned a little bit more about Miss Meanie Beanie. Are you starting to think maybe she's not as mean as Pixie says, as Prudence says? Are we learning a bit about Ricky? Do we think he really is rotten? I think we're going to learn a lot about the way that we all sometimes just make judgments about people before we have a chance to get to know them very soon. So we have Pixie is now getting ready to be taken home from school by her teacher. But for some reason, Ricky is still at the school when everyone else has gone home. So that might be a question we want to ask for next time too. So once again, I invite you to, if you have a summary for chapters 2 and 3, to email it to me. And again, you'll see my email there. If you have any predictions you would like to make, you can send those to me. And if you have any questions of something that you may have thought of, I won't give any spoilers yet, but if you have any questions about something that I may have just glossed over and not covered enough, let me know. And as always, I want to make sure that you have permission before you access anything online or send me any emails. But meanwhile, I just encourage you to keep reading, stay safe, and have a great day. Thanks for joining me.